What's up, guys? So as the title suggests, this video is going to be about whether or not I believe criminalizing meat would be effective vegan activism, or in other words, effective vegan lobbying. Now, if you are more of a sentimental vegan, or if you believe that animals and humans are of equal moral value, then I would urge you to click away. This video is definitely not for you, and I would prefer to spare you the offense. Now, for the rest of you, let's ponder whether or not criminalizing meat would be effective, whether or not it would lead to a reduction of animal consumption, and would have ultimately positive consequences. If you were to visit any typical animal rights protest or animal rights demonstration, you might hear these supporters chant rather vehemently, "Meat is murder." Many vegans and animal rights activists make the case that meat is murder, and that therefore the consumption of animal products should be made illegal. Making this a law would somehow decrease animal consumption and benefit animals and humans. Now, as an ethical vegan myself, while I do concede the point that unnecessarily slaughtering animals is morally equivalent to murder, I want to make the case that meat is not murder, and that criminalizing meat would ultimately be counterproductive to veganism and to the animals. Hopefully, by the end of the video, I will have made my case well. If you don't agree with me, then I am open to criticism and to response in the comment section or even video format. Meat is not murder. As I stated before, I myself am an ethical vegan, and I believe that unnecessarily slaughtering animals is unethical. But it isn't murder. The formal definition of murder is the unlawful killing of one human by another. The act of slaughtering an animal for food cannot be defined as murder for one of two reasons. One, animals are not human, non-human animals are not human, and two, animals are not legal individuals. Thus, animals possess no legal rights. While yes, in some contexts, unnecessarily torturing an animal can get you into some trouble with the law, it isn't because the animal is an individual. It's because of that animal's relationship to a human. Undoubtedly, many vegans would attempt to counter me with, there are multiple definitions of murder, to which I would reply, not every definition of any word holds the same merit. While yes, there are actions that could fall under a more informal definition of murder, these actions don't hold the same legal implications. Attempting to expand the legal definition of murder by encompassing multiple actions really only convolutes the definition of murder and is just more confusing to non-vegans. It's the reason why I cringe every single time I hear a non-vegan debating with a carnist and they try to assert that meat is murder. And this confusion doesn't just lie with animals. It's also why abortion and capital punishment, despite what some angry activists want you to believe, are not considered murder. So, would criminalizing animal consumption be an effective way to discourage people from eating animals? And part of solving this question means having a basic understanding of how laws and behavior, bad behavior, relate. One way to understand the relationship between bad behavior and law is to view what's called a crime matrix. The crime matrix theorizes that criminal behavior can be divided into 4 quadrants. The top quadrants are reserved for crimes which have an external victim. A few examples are murder, theft, and slander. The bottom quadrants are reserved for crimes with no direct external victim, like drug use and blasphemy. The quadrants on the left contain, quote, aggressive crimes like murder, rape, drug use, and assault. The quadrants on the right contain, quote, transgressive crimes like slander, blasphemy, and verbal harassment. Every crime that you can think of can be placed somewhere on this quadrant. It all depends on whether or not this crime has an external victim and whether or not it is a transgression or an aggression. An aggression means that this crime is physical and it inflicts physical harm of some sort, whereas the transgressive crimes, they inflict harm that can't be quantified. Now you might be wondering, well, where would animal abuse stand? While most people would assert that animal abuse falls into the top left quadrant alongside rape, murder, and theft, this just isn't the case. Animal abuse cannot be placed into the top left quadrant because 1, animals are not legal individuals, and 2, animals themselves are not able to report abuse. Hence, from a legal standpoint, there is no external victim. Can animals be the victims of abuse and harm in a moral sense? Sure, that's why I'm a vegan. But legally speaking, animals are equivalent to mailboxes or mobile phones. Their rights only exist insofar as they are in a relationship with a human. Justin Garreau describes the relationship between bad behavior and law as the proscription proposition. The proscription proposition is the sense that criminalizing bad behavior will reduce its prevalence in society, thus consequentially benefiting society. The proscription proposition seems to work well with crimes that have external victims, like murder, rape, and theft. But the inverse seems to happen with crimes with no external victim. There are many laws that target behaviors like drug use that paradoxically lead to more crime. Studies have found that neither tough laws nor long prison terms have had any measurable effect upon the patterns of the use of heroin, cocaine, or crack. This would likely be the case if the consumption of animal products was to be criminalized, as animal abuse and animal use is an external victimless crime in the legal sense. And considering that animal consumption is not just legal but normative behavior, there's no reason to believe that if meat were made illegal, people would just stop eating it. If anything, it might pique their interest a little bit. Similarly, prohibiting the consumption of alcohol during the 1920s in America did not stop Americans from having a thirst for alcohol. To learn more about this weird inverse relationship and why sometimes legal prohibition can even benefit criminals, be sure to check out the links in the description. Now, with crimes like rape, murder, theft, and assault, there are indeed external victims who can report the crime and pursue justice. Criminalizing these behaviors, thanks to the proscription proposition, do not generally lead to the rise of more rape and more murder and more theft. And what do you know, studies show that gun controls are the best way to reduce the severity of conflicts amongst drug distributors. Police policies targeting guns and gun carrying have reduced serious crimes, robbery, homicide, and gun possession. Now, just going along with everything that these vegans want to criminalize meat, let's just assume that meat were to become illegal, within the next 5 to 10 or 15 years. What would this mean for the lives of animals? Because this would not mean the end of animal consumption. Well, first, production would be driven underground. So you can kiss goodbye any vestiges of humility that these animals are currently given in the industry. And that's saying a lot because animals are already treated like shit. Animals in the United States are supposed to have some protection under the Animal Welfare Act. This definitely doesn't give them rights on any means, but it requires that industries treat them nicely. However, in this world, there exists no government regulations or policies to facilitate how these dealers are treating their animals. Considering that animals are already genetically modified as mutants to basically produce more of their product while requiring much less of a cost, also considering the fact that animals are fed antibiotics and given bovine hormones amongst many other combinations of hormones, one could only imagine that these animals would be subjected to once they are driven underground. Animals would be subjected to living in underground caves or perhaps closed off in tightly knit hideouts that are in inhospitable areas as to avoid detection. Now, these animals would be subjected to very, very tight living conditions, and any means at all taken to remove teeth and genitalia and beaks would be pretty much fair game. On the whole, animals' lives would be even worse, and the quality of their product would be far more inedible for human consumption. Thus, no one would be benefited by the criminalization of meat. So, you might be a vegan and you might be wondering, well, Tevin, what do you think we should do to help decrease the consumption of animal products? Now, one thing that vegans could do to help the cause of veganism and to reduce unnecessary animal harm would be to invest in technologies like clean meat, for example. Rather than coming from an animal which causes harm and requires death, clean meat is different. It is simply a collection of cells that are cultured from an animal and are then produced in a laboratory. Perhaps if vegans could invest and support these products and help to reduce the stigmatization of these products, this would encourage carnists or non-vegans to see this as a viable alternative to meat from the animal, which causes harm. Another thing would be to just do what we are doing right now, which is effective activism that doesn't involve trying to criminalize meat, just trying to get people to be a little bit more aware of their animal consumption. There are a lot of good documentaries out at this point. There are some good vegan documentaries, even Rotten, which is the new Netflix documentary series. All of these actively work to help consumers be a little bit more educated about their products. It's easy for us to go under the impression that making this criminal, this behavior, would somehow discourage people from eating animals, and we have to have a basic understanding of how this works. It likely would not stop people from eating animals. And if anything, even if it were to somehow produce less crime, the animals who are subjected to the black market would be subjected to even harsher abuses. So as hard as it is for animals now, it would be far worse for their well-being to criminalize this behavior. So that was the point of this video. It was a pretty short video, but I just wanted to make my case regarding making meat illegal. So anyway, thanks guys for watching, and peace.